On this episode of Full Bore, I practice the art of social distancing by not hanging out with my friends and family and working on this car instead. Anyway, that's enough babbling. I've got a bit of degreaser in my hands here. I'm going to try and clean up as much of the shmutz on this chassis as I can before I start to attack the rust that's in the sort of front portion of the chassis. It's mostly a lot of build up around the steering box region and all that sort of stuff. I will be taking the steering box out and giving it a bit of a run through to see what it looks like inside. This thing of course doesn't have power steering, which is a bit of a bummer, but that's a part of the experience. But get me gurney cracking or whatever that cheap Chinese thing is, and hey, we'll see what we can do. Make it look $1 million, eh? What I've got here is just some causticy degreaser. It's the sort of degreaser that you find in your parts store in the bottles, not in your spray tins. The spray tin stuff is like white spirits based, so it's sort of like a soluble oil emulsifier sort of stuff, whereas this is like a causticy alkaline. I think it's made out of like an alkaline crystal salt dissolved in water, and it just acts as an emulsifier to allow oil to, of course, emulsify in water, which helps you to degrease chassis and engines and stuff like that. The reason I'm using this as opposed to the spray can stuff, of course, you'd probably go through about 20 billion spray cans on a chassis like this, and I think this stuff is less likely to kill your lawn. Not that you sort of want to be doing it on your lawn anyway, but hey, I don't have a workshop, so beggars aren't choosers, I suppose. I'm Rob Schneider as a carrot. So as you can see, well, probably a bit difficult for you to see, but I have cleaned down this chassis as much as physically possible. Now it's covered in a lot of surface rust, which is quite alright. We will have to look at tackling that major rust in that front cross member. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to go about that, but I've got to get a few supplies like some plate steel and some MIG gas and all that sort of stuff. What I've been doing in the meantime is making sure that all the shmutz is taken off of it. I've been taking off some other bits such as the drive shafts and a few other brackets here and there, just to make sure that it's pretty much as bare as possible. Now I have been sort of held up with a few different things, one of them being a global pandemic and the fact that I don't like going to the shops. But I do have to buy some MIG gas, and I'll have to hit up Bunnings for that one. But as for the engine, if you follow me into the Full Bore Engineering Facility of Science, now this is of course the 3B engine, which I've been rebuilding, and you've probably been keeping up to date with it. Not much has changed, and there's a couple reasons for that. Of course, I don't like going to the shops and all that sort of schmutz. all the stuff is laid out on the table, and I've just been slowly getting that all together and painting stuff up in that aluminium duplicolor engine enamel, which comes up $1 million. So I've been slowly getting that stuff done. Now, of course, when you're rebuilding an engine, it's always a good idea to just inspect every single little part, because there's no point pouring a whole bunch of money into something such as this just to have it blow up on you. Now, I was inspecting the cam bearings, and I reckon the cam bearings are something that a lot of people tend to overlook. Now, in this case, it was a good idea that I did have a squiz at them, because this is cam bearing number 1. I'll give you a squiz. It's actually picked up a bit of material and spun it around, so it looks like absolute rubbish, and it is rubbish. Now, so that has to be replaced, of course. I was also inspecting the rest of the cam bearings, and I realised that none of them were actually lined up with the oil gallery holes. Now, every cam bearing has a hole in it, such as that there, and what that allows is for oil to come through and actually lubricate the cam whilst it's spinning in that bearing. Now, it looks like somebody's actually been in this motor in the past and replaced these cam bearings for whatever reason. It probably explains why the rest of the engine was so clean when I was pulling it apart earlier. Now, if I hadn't have rebuilt this motor and just sent it, I would have picked that up, and I probably would have absolutely destroyed my cam up. I don't know how long it would have lasted, but generally if something's going without oil, it's going to screw up on you, that's for sure. So it was a good idea that I actually pulled down this engine, even though it probably wasn't exactly necessary from the outside, because it was running like a dime, but it was a good thing that we picked up on that. So what that essentially means is that somebody has in fact rebuilt this bad boy in the past, and once again it explains why it's so clean and why it's in such good nick, but they just didn't put those cam bearings in correct, and we'll be doing that in the future and showing you how to do it. Now, I don't have the specific tool for it, so I'll probably have to make one up. Now, if you look over here on the table, everything's all laid out nice and schmick and professional. The crank was in excellent condition. It didn't have any sort of major wear on it. Cam's in good nick, even though it did pick up that bit of material and spin it around, wrecking that bearing, but it's actually, there's not a single mark on it. Intake, all the other aluminium bits on the motor have been cleaned and spray painted with duplicolor aluminium spray, and I've got to say that stuff looks the schmickness. But yeah, that's pretty much just the what we're up to at the moment, hence I haven't been putting out many videos, so keep an eye out, because I'll have a pretty special engine assembly video coming out in the near future once I get all my bits and pieces. These are my big end bearings, piston rings, main bearings, full gasket set, and the only thing that I'm really waiting on to put this whole thing back together is those cam bearings, which are taking a little longer than what I would have expected, but hey, what can you do? Now, that pretty much concludes this episode of Full Bore. There's a mosquito. Pardon me. Now, that pretty much concludes this episode of Full Bore. Dang it. Now, that pretty well concludes this episode of Full Bore. Future episodes we'll be tackling that chassis, of course, and putting together this engine. Of course, that's going to be a pretty special episode, which might include a fair bit of time lapse or something along those lines. So keep an eye out for that, and hit that subscribe button and the little bell thing, which is, yes, in that corner. We'll catch you next time, and keep cruising until we next meet on the next episode of Full Bore.